We are joined now by Wagner Silveira, all the way from Auckland, New Zealand. So, with a new runtime in public preview, an improved designer tool, different execution models, and so on, there is definitely a lot happening with Azure Logic Apps. So, Wagner here has prepared multiple interesting demos. So, quickly over to you, Wagner.
Thank you, Surya. So welcome everyone. Welcome to the second presentation of the second day of Integrate Remote 2021. As Surya was saying, my name is Wagner Silveira. I'm the Digital Practice Lead at TITA New Zealand and also an Azure MVP. And today we'll be talking about new scenarios with Logic Apps. So with the Logic Apps standard going live and a whole lot of things that happened on the last 8 to 12 months, there is a lot of scenarios that we were not able to implement in Logic Apps that we are able to do it now. So what I'll try to do is bring to attention 4 different scenarios and see how we'll not be able to implement it before, but now able to implement with the tools that we have available, both with Logic Apps standard or in some cases with Logic Apps consumption as well. So on the agenda, what we have is we're going to be talking a little bit about identity-based authentication that we didn't have a good story before. We're going talking about making a decision between having your state available all the time and changing that for more speed. We're going to be talking about the Logic Apps Anywhere that you've been hearing a lot later. And we're going to be talking about the network integration or private network integration. So let's start with the identity-based. What is the story so far? The story before is that any kind of security inbound, when you needed to call a Logic app specifically, the only type of security that you had was the shared keys, right? Unless you hide the Logic Apps in front of API management. Then from an outbound point of view, you have the ability to have identity associated to connectors, but the identity belonged to each one of the connectors. You didn't ever had a way to identify the Logic app as an identity, a system identity in a way. And was always named accounts or connection strings. So this is like makes some places a little bit complicated, having to create extra accounts sometimes in systems just to be able to use that account just for integration. What's the story now? So compared to what we had before, now we have OAuth-based inbound authentication, specifically on consumption. That is there for a little while, but there was not many people looking at that from what I noticed on Twitter and some other places. And we also have the ability to use managed identities when you wanted to have outbound authentication. How we're going to be using that? So where can we find those new things? So one of the places is the new authentication option that we were talking about for inbound is available in Logic Apps consumption, and you're going to have a little bit of a look into that one. But the managed identity options, both system identity and user identity, are available in Logic Apps consumption, and you also have some of those options in Logic Apps standard. So let's see if the demo gods are with us. Let's try the very first demo of the day. So on this demo, what we have is a very common Logic Apps consumption, right? And a very complicated Logic Apps, by the way. If you just look at that, it does a hello world. But I'm not interested in what has inside the Logic app. What I wanted to actually show is the ability to now have authorization against a Logic app, creating a authorization policy, similar to the JWT token that we do sometimes to validate against API management. So for that demo, what I did was I created an identity, application registration called Integrated 2021 Logic App, and that is going to represent that logic app on the way when you're trying to authenticate. So you're going to be authenticating and requesting permission to use that application. And I created a couple of things. I created a integrated 2021 client to represent a client that doesn't have full permission to access that. And I created an API on API management, and notice that that is just a normal consumption API that has a managed identity. So that API has a managed identity associated. I'm not going through the details of connecting and giving permissions of the managed identity. There is a lot of articles around that you can use for that. But what I wanted to show you is, in this case, what I need to do is I'm calling that API management, and I'm saying call the logic apps, but pass my managed identity against that resource that we agreed or that we created. And if you look at the managed identity, I'm saying that the issuer, my policy is my issuer is the my tenant's Active Directory. My audience, so the things that is allowed to come here is anyone that has permission against API Integrated 2021 Logic App. And I created one extra thing. I created a custom claim and say, only allow things to get in if the app ID associated to that is that value here, which is the app ID of of this managed identity. If you go down to the service principal, you're going to find that that is the app ID associated to that API management, right? So what I wanted to do now is here on Postman, I'm going to do a couple of calls. The first one, I'm going to be calling that logic app using a PIM. And notice that here I only passing the normal stuff. I'm only passing my API key and the OCP trace, because inside API management, it's using its own identity to connect to logic apps. If everything goes fine, and it takes a little bit of time to wake up, I come back with hello world, okay? So that works fine. But what happens if I call in that from another client that doesn't have that same identity? So I'm using that logic app, calling this the same endpoint, but with another user that has, I'm even going to get like a new token just to guarantee that it's like a valid token, right? And if I send that, I'm receiving mismatching OAuth claim. So now I can actually restrict logic apps using modern technology from an identity point of view, even on the consumption model. Okay, so that was our first demo. Let's think about some of the gotchas. You probably noticed that for that demo, I was using logic apps consumption. Ideally, I would be doing that with logic apps standard, that if I could. Not that we always going to be doing things with standard, but just to show the capability there. But inbound authentication is not available in logic apps standard yet, and the stress on the yet, right, is something that is going to be coming in place. It's just not out there on the first time that I went to GA, but according to the product group, it's something that is on the backlog. So you're probably going to have the parity with the other services like functions and the app services that already have that kind of capability in place. The other thing that is you might think is, okay, so now that I have that, I don't have to worry about the share keys because no one is going to be using that. There is no way today to actually just go and disable share key access keys. You still have that. And if you don't pass any kind of authentication, it's going to try to authenticate with share keys first. So just get that in mind. If you're trying to seeing errors because you don't have a signature, it's because probably you didn't pass the a token, and then it just reverts back to signature. There's another thing is there is no operator on those policies. You always saw there was like issuer is this value and app ID is this value, right? So if you wanted to do something like, does my list of claims contains this particular row, you're better off pushing that kind of stuff on API management and then guarantee now that your API management is the only thing that can talk to Logic Apps. But notice that now we don't need to restrict more by IP. You actually can restrict by that identity. And that's allow you to use Logic Apps on that same scenario where before, when you wanted to do restriction, you have to be using API management developer, the basic or standard, something that has a static IP address. Okay. And finally, the managed identity is only enabled for selected connectors. I know that we didn't do a particular demo of that, right? But managed identity is also available on Logic Apps. I can do like a just quick show of that. If you go down to the Logic App, you have the ability to implement an identity and either system assigned or a user assigned. But the use of those identities is not for every single connection, it's just for some connectors. So bear that in mind when you're trying to use this. So that was our first scenario that we're not able to implement like last year until probably June, and now you're able to implement and secure your connections, even when you're just using the pure consumption models. So let's go to the next one, and that is something that is new, quite new, that came with the Logic Apps standard. So it's the idea of do a trade-off between having a lot of state for auditability and troubleshooting versus having increase on the speed of the throughput on the Logic App. So what is the story? The story that is like until Logic Apps standard, until really not that far away, there was only a single model, and on that model, state was king, right? You would know exactly everything that happened on your Logic App, for better or worse. That gives us like probably one of the reasons why a lot of people get quite interested on Logic Apps, because it was really easy to troubleshoot. But on the other side, there was starting to highlight a number of things that make it like a little bit slower compared with other technologies, or in some cases, I would go to extra lengths to secure it because it was actually showing data that in theory would be a little bit more private. As I was saying, optimizations on this case only took you so far, right? We could like remove some things, making it a simpler, try to reduce the number of actions in order to reduce the number of executions of the store. But there is only something, so much that we could do on this case. What we have now is you have a choice of a model that is closer to your requirement. Do I need something that is like really needs a lot of throughput, but I'm happy to sacrifice all that goodness of the information that is there, or I actually don't want it to have that information because it might be private by default, and I don't want it to have to go and select every one of the actions that I wanted to remove the inputs and outputs. So now you have the ability to choose what models you wanted to work with. So now you have stateful workflows, and the stateful workflows, what it's going to bring you is like all that auditing, all the information inside each one of the actions, right? Which was going to make you like much simpler to the troubleshoot. And because you have the state of everything, including the triggers, you can do resubmissions from the platform. You don't need to request your original sender to send information back. On the other side, you have now stateless logic apps, where you have a lot more throughput. You're going to have a little bit less cost compared to stateful workflows, because you're not doing all of those operations if you don't want it to. And you also have like the idea of I'm not logging anything by default. And when I log any of that information, is because I need it for troubleshoot. So I can make sure that I only see the data during troubleshoot, not by default. And don't have to worry about every one of the actions that might or might not carry private information. So how you're doing that is basically using stateless workflows on Logic Apps standard for high throughput, and doing stateful Logic Apps for the high resilience. In this case, think about resilience in terms of be independent of the original sender to do resubmissions or to do any kind of troubleshooting, or if you needed extra auditability on each one of the actions. So you have the choice, and you can actually combine those two things together when you need to. Let's take a quick look at this demo, and hopefully that one is going to be working exactly as I wanted, but it's a bit hard to visualize. So is that one here. So what I have here is a couple of logic apps. So I have a logic apps that puts data into a service bus. Just show very quickly here in Designer. So I have a logic apps that is going to be putting some information on the service bus topic, and I have two logic apps that do exactly the same, but one set up on stateful and one set up as stateless. Both of them getting to one copy of that message from the subscription. What we try to see here, and I can actually show you some examples already, that when I'm running that on a stateful, I had like things like 45, 49 seconds to get the data back. While when you're doing that with the stateless, we have like the smaller values, right? But what I'm trying to do here now is actually send 5 messages with a specific label, and just see how fast it goes to pick up those data with the stateless versus the stateful, and just see if we can see a little bit of a difference. Hopefully everything is still online. So that one was accepted. It's going to take a delay of 15 seconds. So just let's see if this finish to run, which should be stateful overview. It's running, and notice that all of that is running locally, okay? Come on, shouldn't take that long. Yeah, it's just running the items on the other side. Let's see if any of those two, either the retrieve items on the stateful or the other one, started running. So that one is pick up a couple of the items, and the retrieve item stateful actually already succeeded to pick up at 11:20, 11:20, while those ones are still running a little bit. Okay, so as you can see, the stateless, because it doesn't have any requirements to store information anywhere, is running much faster than those other ones. Okay, although it should take a little bit less time than this. But I'm not going to be spending too much time on that, otherwise we're not going to be covering everything that we needed to cover. But hopefully that gives you an idea of like the difference and how faster the stateless would be compared to the stateful. Let's go to the gotchas. So the first gotcha on that one is that select between stateless and stateful is actually a design decision, right? And each logic apps can only have a single state. Moving from stateful to stateless to stateful is relatively easy because everything that you have on stateless you would have on stateful. But not everything is available on stateless. So, for example, you don't have the ability to have managed connection triggers. All the triggers that are on stateless are the built-in triggers, as far as I could see here. And one gotcha that got me exactly in the beginning is variables are not available on stateless, just to give you some examples. So just bear in mind that when you're creating the stateless workflows, you needed to understand what is available there. So you should be able to work with them properly. But you're going to have the benefit of faster throughput. Okay, so that is the second one. Then let's go to the third item. And the third item here is Logic Apps Anywhere, that you all probably already heard a lot about that, right? So from a Logic Apps Anywhere point of view, the story so far was Logic Apps was not everywhere. Logic Apps was pretty much an Azure only the component, the iPaaS running on Azure. So it was bound to a resource group, right? So you have like individual Logic Apps bound to a resource group, and you have to treat each one of those Logic Apps individually. You have to get those items and deploy. Even if you deploy in a package on a template, you needed to work with each one of them to parameterize and doing all of that kind of stuff. And each one of them was its own little world. What's new now is that you have your choice of deployment, right? So you can choose where you want to deploy, and we're going to be talking a little bit about that. So as I already saw from the keynote and a lot of other things, you have the ability to deploy that on Azure, locally, on any other clouds. You have your choice of packaging, because now you can say, I can still use my Logic Apps consumption, and I'm going to be deploying that I'm going to be deploying that individually using the consumption model, or I'm going to bundle a number of Logic Apps and deploy them together as an application and take advantage of them being segregated on that application, like Beck was talking yesterday, be able to make my Logic Apps smaller and reusable pieces, because I don't have the extra burden of having to be calling all of that in ecosystem, though all of those Logic Apps are close and easy to work with compared to what it was before. But I also have my choice of compute. As I said, I can still use consumption. I can use the PaaS services in Azure or in other clouds, and I can use as a container my own compute on premises, on my data center, on other clouds. How is that magic happening? is basically with the introduction of the Logic Apps standard. Now you have those two options. You have the option to do like pure consumption like we have today, or package that as an application and deploy in various forms, right? The forms that you have is either continue using the PaaS model that Function and Apps has had today, or to containerize that and start deploying this as a container, both in Azure, on-prem, or in other clouds. So if you deploy me on-prem, you have the option to say, is it small enough and I can actually start to work with that really small and just deploy on my Docker server or as a Docker image? Or if I needed that to be part of a bigger ecosystem and I wanted everything to be controlled and scaled, I can put that inside Kubernetes. On any other cloud, you should be able to use that with Kubernetes, okay? And one thing that is important here, and we're going to be talking about that on the gotchas, is although you put in that anywhere, you still have the ability to manage that centrally through Azure using the Logic Apps Arc. So let's try to do a really quick session or demo on the Logic Apps standard on Docker, see what is the basics that we needed to create a Logic App standard and containerize. And then after that, we talk a little bit about the gotchas. So yes, that's the right one. No, that is not the right one. This is the right one. So what I have here is another Logic App, and that Logic App is actually just talking to a SQL server. I have a way to post data to SQL and another way to get data from SQL, right? And I can run data locally, I can test, and everything looks fine, but I wanted to deploy that as a Docker container. And in order to do that, I simply needed to include a Docker file, excuse me, with some details. We're going to find here that there is kind of a script. The Docker file has like a set of things that you needed to put there. The main thing that you're looking here as a details is I'm defining where is my environment, where my web job storage is, because as we know, the Logic Apps needs that information to execute the workflow dispatches, making sure that everything is in place. And in this case, although I deploy in the Docker locally, I'm still using my a Azure Web Storage. Okay. Then I'm saying where is the actual code goes. I'm exposing or providing the information about the connection string that it should be connected to my local SQL server, similar to what I would be doing if I was creating my own app settings. And I define the type of environment that I'm going to be using, the name, the host name that it should be using, and the website name, so I can actually find out the more information when it's putting the host and putting all the keys in place. So once I have that, in order to use this, I just needed to run a quite simple command, right? That is building Docker image, and that Docker image is going to be available for me on my Docker server. I can then get this and push it into container register, any container register that I needed to use. I can start to actually run that locally or push it into Kubernetes and things like that. For the sake of the brevity, what I did here is I already have one of those running, okay? And I'm going to show you that I'm going to be calling this Logic App specifically, and what is the steps that we needed to do, because now that it's running there, I don't have, in theory, I don't have access to my management plane. I don't know how to actually connect it to this. Like in order to find what is my URLs to call all the logic apps and things like that. So if I go back to Postman and look into the logic apps on Docker, one thing that you needed to do, and all of that is quite well documented, is once you created the workflow management, once you created the Docker, the first thing you needed to do is make a call to your management API, passing your logic app name. Let me see if I can get this bigger. One more. So I'm passing the logic app name, right? And my trigger. So this is the name of my trigger because it's an HTTP. This is the name of my logic app. And I needed to pass the code, the master key for my logic app. That I only going to be able to find this on. If I go back, which one did I already finish? This one. If I go back to the storage where the logic apps is associated to, you're going to find the secrets, and here is the integrate. Inside the host.json, you have the location where your master key is. Okay. So again, all of that is quite well documented, and on the documents from Microsoft to show how to do this, you have access to that as well. So back to that. Once I run that, I receive back the location where my logic app is going to be the actual endpoint of my logic app, right? Although it's still using localhost 443 and HTTPS because that's how it created. I know that in order to call that, I needed to call localhost 8000, and then I simply get all the rest of that API, logic app, stateful, triggers, manual invoke, the thing, and the signature that is like all the way in the back. So if I get this, I can go and send a request. If the demo gods are with us, I receive back a list of comments that was on the database. So you don't think that I'm cheating? I would never do that. There we go. Now the name is Integration Crew. Integration 2021 was Wagner cheating. And I'll send that. Of course I was cheating. I needed to go and get the same thing for my logic app post data. Get this. It was so good. It was too good so far. And using that call on the parameters, change the signature. So with some luck, it should be writing, and yes, now we have 5 comments. Okay. And I'm going to stop here because we're going to be calling that again on another demo, so we can see that everything was there. So there we go. What are the gotchas in this case? The main thing is your choice of storage, right? You see that I was still using the Azure storage. So although I'm using that on Docker, I'm not totally disconnected from Azure. Remember that the SQL storage is a viable option that is currently in private preview, and is going to be probably your option to run in those things of Azure. So as soon as that is ready for public preview or for consumption, that would be the default or the preferred option instead of pointing all of that to Azure. And for local development, you still have Azure Write now as an emulator for that. The other thing is the management plane. So as you saw, it's like a whole lot of work to actually find how to get all that information. But now you have, if you're thinking about Logic App Arc, that's what is that give you like the extra benefit. If you're running that in multiple clouds or you're running that on-prem, you want to still have the same kind of experience that you had on Azure, and using Logic App Arc to connect and manage those things from the same kind of control plane that you have today. And the other thing is, if you wanted to be totally disconnected, you have to really thinking about built-in versus managed connectors, because the built-in connectors are going to be inside the Logic App. Is not going to be creating anything extra. But if you're using managed connectors, you're still creating a dependency with Azure, right? There's nothing wrong with that. It's just into making sure that in environments that are fully locked, we're not trying to use those connectors. And more, the built-in connectors from the product group's point of view are exactly those cases where we wanted to have all those things ring-fenced inside on-prem. So they put in effort on those types of connectors first. So last but not least, let's take a look at private network integration and go quickly, because I know there is we have like 10 minutes to go max. So the story so far on that was we only had the ability to do outbound integration, right? We didn't have any option for inbound. Remember, this is connecting to networking. And if you're doing outbound integration or outbound network integration, was only based on on-premise data gateway. You could connect it to on-prem, you could connect it to a VM on a virtual network, but was always using the on-premise data gateway. And the on-premise data gateway is quite a broad brush, right? You open the channel, but we didn't have like a fine-grained saying, I wanted to go to this specific resource and to this specific port. You just open the channel and you have to manage the security in a different layer. What is new now? You have outbound and inbound integration within network and on-premise available, right? And it's much more focused because you're able to actually put a lot more control and be much more granular on that. How you can do that? Basically using Logic Apps Standard. And inside Logic Apps Standard, you have a couple of outbound options. You have VNet integration, and you have hybrid connection, which is a kind of an evolution of what on-premise data gateway would give it to you. And from an inbound point of view, you have private endpoints. Toon showed an awesome example of how to use in private endpoints yesterday in his demo, right? So I'm not even going to be working much with that. But see how much options now we have to integrate with VNet compared to what we had before. That was pretty much just one and just outbound. Let's take a quick look at accessing that same SQL server now using hybrid connection. So here is my Logic Apps Standard demo. So now we're working on Logic Apps Standard. And inside that Logic Apps Standard, I have a little Logic app that goes and talks to that same database that we were working before, right? On premises, and getting the list of the items that we had there. So the way that I'm doing this is using hybrid connections, which was not an option that we had before. So I simply configure hybrid connections like we configured for functions, web services before, and see that here I'm using Theta620L, that's the name of my laptop, and port 1433. I actually saying the resource and the port that I needed to that are going to connect, instead of just saying connected to that agent on the on premises. And this is basically what we needed to do. After that, you can name the resource the same way that you name it here, and it's going to be doing the redirection for you. Let's see if that works. Fingers crossed. So I have a hybrid connection demo that is calling get-tb-info. See that compared to the other one, this one is going to Logic App Standard Demo, Azure AppSites.NET 443. So actually going to the cloud, right? And if I run this and everything is still up and running, I'm going to have a list here, including that last one that we inserted before. So I'm going from the cloud to on-prem using hybrid connection. So I don't have that SQL open anywhere on premises, sorry, on the cloud. I'm just using the normal hybrid connection connectivity that we had before. So that would be the last demo. So what are the gotchas on that? You needed to, in order to use the hybrid connection, you needed to be using built-in connectors. The reason for that is similar to what we were discussing before. Those hybrid connections are inside Logic Apps proper, instead of being managed outside by Microsoft and you using those services, right? With that, all the virtual network integration and the network connectivity that you put inside the Logic Apps boundary is accessible. So seems like we made it. Let's do quickly through some takeaways. And the first one, I think, is that we're all going to agree that Logic Apps now open a lot of new scenarios and bring in workflow much closer to app development that we had before, right? A whole lot of those things was kind of showstoppers for the developers and applications using workflows behind the scenes more. But now we have a lot of those available. But remember that the Logic Apps standard in particular is still a new technology. So there are gaps, and those gaps might affect your design now, right? Just make sure that you understand your choices and that you also know what is available and how you can use those things. But most important, don't discard consumption. That in some cases, consumption is also going to be part of the puzzle. Is that you should be able to use all of those things together instead of just one or the other. With that, is just the end of my talk. If you wanted to get in touch with me, you can get through any one of those locations, right? So you can find me on Twitter on WSilveiraNZ. You can send me emails on wagner.silveira@note2self.tech, or you can connect to me or look into my blog. I'm going to be grabbing some of those demos and some of those details and blog and explain a little bit more step by step and publish on the blog in the next weeks. So maybe keep an eye on that. And that's it for now. Surya, how are we going with time?
Yeah, well, I guess we're really good, Wagner. So also thanks for hosting a really wonderful session. It was great, and I hope everyone enjoyed it.
Let's see. So I'll just go through some of those questions here. Just let me move those things and let me know when we finishing the things. What I'm going to do is I'm going to push this in here and try to go through those answers. Are there cases where you needed to set authorization on Logic Apps instead of or in addition to APIM, assuming that APIM is already there? Well, if you're using APIM and Logic Apps together, and the APIM is your fronting for the Logic Apps, I think you would be better off putting the rules for authorization inside API management because they are richer, but using that a similar technique to what I showed to guarantee that no one else can connect to the Logic App, apart from API management. This way, you probably would be protected, Ahmed. I hope that answered that question. Next one would be, are stateless logic apps only available for standard SKU? Yes, that is correct. So stateless logic apps is part of the standard the standard SKU. So wouldn't have that in consumption, or at least not now. Not sure if there is going to be any kind of plans for that. Is it possible to switch stateful, stateless in runtime via flag? No, you can do that at design time, right? Because if I show you one thing quickly, on the logic app, on the workflow JSON, at the end, you saying what is the kind. But remember what I was saying before, you would have an issue with trying to move from stateful to stateless, because not everything that is on stateful is available on stateless. Torban was asking, we have seen VS Code in a lot of presentations so far. Is VS Code considered to be the preferred tool for developing logic apps rated than Visual Studio? The tools are available on VS Code, and I think that is where the effort is being put right now, Torban. But probably a really good question for us to catch up with the product group. But at this stage, VS Code would be the preferred tool, because that's where we have all the tooling. Rebecca was asking more or less the same thing. But she's saying, find Visual Studio to be better for consumption. If you needed to work with consumption and you're happy to use the designer on Visual Studio, that would be an option, Rebecca. Another question on that. For me, Stefan, I would be focusing on VS Code at this stage. I find out there is like a lot of things that I can do inside VS Code that is simpler and more streamlined than what I used to do on Visual Studio, but it's probably the preference, right? And specifically for Logic Apps, we don't have those tooling there yet. Are all connectors available the same between stateful and stateless? All the built-in connectors are available to both, and all the managed connectors are available as actions for stateless, while for stateful, we also have access to the triggers. I'll put all of those demos in a place and do a bit of cleanup, Anonymous, and share that on as part of a blog post in the next week or so. Vivek, when migrating Docker container with standard logic apps from Azure to AWS GCP, do you see reason for performance change provided the CPU and performance match? The only reason I would see that right now, Vivek, would be the latency from accessing the storage accounts because of what I was showing. But as soon as SQL storage, then I would assume that no. Right, but didn't have a chance to do a test. On that note, one of the guys from Twitter, Vinny James, he was actually doing a lot of work on that, and he has a new logic app, a new set of blog posts. So I'm going to try to put that on LinkedIn and ping you. Surya, again, just let me know when I have to stop, okay? I'll just continue on those.
I guess we're almost out of time, so I guess we.
Okay, so maybe get I'll get a couple. I'm actually going to get that one from Jeff, and then I'll try to reply the other ones on offline. So Jeff was asking, is Azure a viable option for storage in Docker? Not for production, because I actually was running some of those tests with Azurite, and for development is fine, but as soon as you put a little bit more pressure, it wouldn't scale. So from what I understand from the product group, they would say if you're deploying on Azure, you would be using consumption depending on the type of depending on the type of performance or execution that you have. If you have like a lot of executions, it would go with the SQL, because you have a much better fine tuning on your performance on that one. And also, if you're going to be running off Azure, that would be the case. Hope that helped. Same thing for Ronnie. I think is that we should be all paying a lot of attention to the SQL storage that is right now in preview, in private preview. So that we should be that would be the options to be out of Azure if you're running things off Azure. Then in this case, I think that would be Surya. Thank you very much for the opportunity, and I hope that you all enjoyed, because it was really fun for me.
Covey.co